Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the fjords, not for glory, not for raiding, but for something far more grueling. Chores. You've probably heard that being a Viking meant plundering monasteries and howling into the wind with a horned helmet, which, by the way, was never a thing. But truth be told, if you actually lived during the Viking Age, chances are you'd be rowing. A lot. And probably before the sun had even bothered to show up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where and when you're listening. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir awake just before dawn in a longhouse that smells like ash, damp wool, and someone's sweaty boots from last night. Your eyes sting from the smoke still curling off yesterday's fire pit. The warmth of the coals is gone, replaced by a cold draft that snakes down your back like a wet eel. You blink a few times, hoping maybe, just maybe, this isn't your turn for rowing duty. It is. Outside, the fjord waits. Cold, dark, and not even remotely excited to see you. There's no dramatic music, no blood-pumping montage. Just you, some other bleary-eyed crewmates, and a long wooden boat bobbing patiently like it knows you're not awake enough to row straight. Rowing in a Viking longship isn't like a peloton class with a cheerful instructor. It's damp. It's silent. It's rhythmically painful. Your hands go numb within minutes, and your arms burn like they've been cursed by a low-grade god of shoulder injuries. The sun still hasn't crested the mountains, and all you hear is the dull creak of oarlocks and someone sniffling in the back. That's probably Haldor. Haldor always forgets gloves. You shift your weight, trying to find a comfortable position on the hard plank beneath you. It's the same plank you sat on yesterday, and the day before. You've named it. Sven. Sven the Butt Crusher. Historically, Viking crews rowed for hours at a time, sometimes switching out with others if they were lucky enough to have a full team. But often, you just rowed, for hours, through rain, through sleet, sometimes through conversations about the proper way to gut a cod, which is far more graphic than you'd think and less helpful than you'd hope. At some point, a faint pink glow begins to crawl across the water. The fjord reflects it like polished iron, all shimmering and cold. It should be beautiful, but you're too focused on whether your arms are about to fall off to really care. A few historians still debate how often Vikings truly used sails versus relying entirely on oars for certain routes. Some argue that in coastal or river travel, rowing was nearly constant. Others suggest they used sails more frequently, especially when transporting goods rather than heading into battle. Either way, today, you're rowing. A seagull lets out a sharp, mocking squawk above you. You look up, and for a moment you entertain the thought that this bird has a better life than you. It can fly. It doesn't row. It definitely doesn't have to rub whale oil on blisters at the end of the day. You pause, hoping for a break. Instead, someone ahead of you grunts and shifts. The rhythm resumes. Your oar dips back into the icy water, and you keep going. By mid-morning, your arms are jelly. Your back is fried, and your stomach is making sounds that would frighten livestock. You're rowing to a nearby settlement, not to trade treasure, but to deliver salted fish and, ironically, to pick up more salt. Because yes, salting is a never-ending cycle. Eventually, the shoreline appears, a modest cluster of wooden huts ringed with smoke and fog. You dock the ship with the enthusiasm of a wet dishcloth and practically fall onto the shore. Your boots squish in the mud. Welcome to the glamorous life of a Viking. You won't remember this trip in a week. There's no saga about it, no carved runestone to mark your heroic delivery of boring goods to other bored people. But you'll do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that.
You barely get to stretch your legs before someone hands you a tangled mass of fishing net. It smells like it's been dead for a week and dragged through a seal's armpit, which is probably accurate. You sigh. Your hands are still sore from rowing, but now they'll get to be sore and fish slimy. Great. Fishing isn't the noble, solitary art form poets make it out to be. It's a team sport with no winners, just people who smell progressively worse as the day goes on. And today, you're in charge of untangling and patching these blessed nets that seem to attract knots like honey attracts flies. Each knot is tight, sea-warped, and fused with little bits of crab shell, seaweed, and possibly part of a sock from a fisherman lost last season. It's like trying to untie a curse made by Poseidon himself. A curse specifically designed to make your knuckles bleed. These nets are made from plant fibers, often flax or hemp, that were harvested, soaked, dried, combed, spun, and twisted by hand, likely by someone who spent the entire process muttering under their breath. Vikings didn't just slap together some strings and hope for the best. They engineered this stuff. It's delicate enough to rip, but strong enough to slice open your palm if you pull the wrong way. Like an overly sensitive cat with knives for claws, and you have at least 5 of these nets to prepare. Meanwhile, a woman near you is hammering dried fish into slabs for transport. Each strike is a rhythmic, echoing thud, as if the fish are being sent off with drum beats. You imagine what your own drumbeat would sound like when you eventually die from sheer exhaustion, probably a lazy thump followed by a squish and a faint fishy aroma. While you wrestle with your salty yarn monster, someone nearby is elbow deep in gutting. The air is thick with brine and iron, and that familiar wet slap of something boneless hitting a wooden board. A boy, maybe 10, carries a bucket of heads over to a pile that's already attracting flies. You make a mental note to burn your clothes later. Again. Possibly your skin too. One of the older fishermen strolls by, puffing on a pipe made of carved bone. He squints at your net like it owes him money. "That one's torn along the belly loop," he says, helpfully unhelpful. You force a smile that says, "Yes, thank you, Olav. I do have eyes." You wonder how many times you've had this same conversation. You suspect it's the Viking equivalent of small talk. And the worst part? You haven't even started fishing yet. Once the nets are semi-functional, stitched up with clumsy repairs and a mix of hope and stubbornness, you haul them into the boat. Again. Your arms scream, "Wasn't rowing enough?" And honestly, you agree with them. The rowboat rocks as you step in, and you catch your balance on a sack of dried herring that puffs out a smell so sharp it nearly resets your brain. Out at sea, it's still cold. Always cold. Even in summer, the north wind kisses your bones with icy lips. The fjord doesn't care about your muscles. The fish don't care that you haven't eaten since yesterday, and your stomach reminds you of that with a dramatic gurgle. You lower the net slowly, rhythmically, trying not to get a face full of sea spray. That goes well for maybe 5 seconds. The boat creaks and shifts, like it's sighing under the weight of your combined hopelessness. You sit back and wait, not peacefully, not like some painting of a man and his thoughts under a tree. You wait while shivering, praying the net doesn't snag on a rock, and watching a cloud that looks vaguely like your Uncle Eric. Eric died on a fishing trip. Probably not a great omen. As time drags on, your mind wanders. You wonder if the gods are watching. Maybe Njord, the sea god, is just sitting there, giggling at you, Maybe Thor is busy hammering something unnecessary, like lightning-shaped forks. Or perhaps they've all abandoned you for someone who isn't so bad at tying knots. Hours later, you haul in the catch. It's not glorious. It's slimy, wriggling. Some of them already half nibbled. One has a second set of eyes, and you decide not to ask questions. You spill them into a trough and get to work. Scaling, gutting, salting, repeat, repeat, repeat. Every time you blink, a fish seems to have multiplied. You consider the possibility that they are cursed. Some historians argue that fishing was as vital as raiding to Viking economies. Others point to archaeological finds, suggesting entire coastal towns thrived solely on fish trade. Some of these towns had no fortifications, no warrior graves, just endless hooks, weights, and the scent of sea salt that refuses to wash out, even centuries later. What they don't debate is how much this all stank. One Norse saga even casually mentions the stinking hours of the gut house, like it was just a thing everyone endured with grim, shared silence. You get it now. The gut house is your whole life. As the catch is packed, salted, and counted, your thoughts drift to the distant markets. Fish were traded for linen, iron tools, soapstone, and on a really good day, glass beads. These weren't flashy beads, mind you. They were slightly uneven and always seemed to turn up in the most awkward colors. But to someone inland, they were treasure. You imagine handing a single cod over in exchange for something shiny and completely impractical. That's the dream. Back on shore, you help load barrels of salted fish into a cart bound for the next village. You'll carry some. Balance one on your back and let the brine seep into your tunic. It's a badge of honor, sort of. Or at least it makes people give you more space. People avoid eye contact with you the way they avoid stepping in horse droppings. Not with disgust, necessarily, just with caution. By the time the sun is high, your hands are puckered and raw, your clothes reek of ocean, and your neck has that special ache that says, "You're going to dream of nets tonight." You didn't see a single sword, didn't chant a single battle cry, just knots, guts, and that one gull that keeps following you. You think it's judging you. You name it Snorri and silently vow revenge. The other villagers greet you with nods, but nobody offers to help unload. They've done their time. One man lifts a bucket and raises an eyebrow. "Catch anything weird today?" You nod solemnly. "A fish with extra eyes." He doesn't flinch. "That's just Bjorn's luck fish," he mutters. "Shows up every year around this time." You choose not to question that either. You trudge home, feet dragging, wondering what tomorrow's task will be. Spoiler, it's also fish. It's always fish. Even when it isn't, somehow, it still is. There is no such thing as sleeping in a Viking settlement. If the sun is up, so are you, and probably already 10 minutes late. You wake to the lovely soundtrack of someone sharpening an axe outside your longhouse and the rhythmic bleating of goats trying to eat your doorframe. Your arms still ache from yesterday's rowing and fish-hauling adventures, but there's no time for self-pity. The fire's out, your boots are damp, and your first job of the day is, surprise, collecting firewood. Again. You haven't known true exhaustion until you've tried chopping frozen birch while your fingers are still half asleep and your nose is leaking like an untied wineskin. Wood isn't just for keeping warm. It's for cooking, boiling, smoking, drying, defending, praying, lighting, shaping, repairing, and on occasion burning boats in slightly dramatic funerals. You don't want to be the reason the household runs out. So you grab your axe, old, chipped, but reliable, and set out toward the forest like a very cold, very reluctant lumberjack. The walk to the woods is never short. Your boots sink slightly into the frostbitten ground, and the wind howls like it's holding a grudge. You pass a neighbor who grunts, mourning, with the enthusiasm of a man halfway through his own firewood trauma. You nod. Solidarity. Once you find the right trees, dry enough to burn, thick enough to justify your walk, and far enough from anyone else's claim, you get to work. Each swing of the axe thuds into bark with a dull finality. You fall into a rhythm. Swing, thud, grunt, exhale. Swing, thud, grunt, regret every life decision. It's not glamorous. It's not even satisfying. The wood doesn't split easily. Some logs twist weirdly, like they've been cursed by woodland elves with a sense of humor. Others are just too wet to bother with. You curse in your head, but you keep swinging. Your breath fogs the air. Your hands grow blisters. You find pine needles in your hair, and you're pretty sure they weren't there when you left the house. Some historians believe that firewood gathering was a constant concern in Viking households, especially in colder regions like Norway and Iceland where winters were long and bitter. There were no matches, no gas stoves, and definitely no central heating. If your fire went out, your entire house turned into a very well-decorated freezer. And because most Viking homes had no chimney, just a smoke hole, lighting a fire indoors meant signing up for slow, eye-watering suffocation. Cozy. You drag your haul back home, logs bundled in rope against your back. The longhouse greets you with warmth and smoke. Someone's already boiling something fishy in the stew pot, and it mixes delightfully with the smell of goat. You deposit the wood in the corner and collapse for exactly 3 seconds before being handed a smaller hatchet. Kindling, says your sister, who has clearly decided today is your turn to make sure the fire doesn't die halfway through cooking dinner. So now you're on your knees, hacking larger logs into slivers and pretending not to notice the growing pile of splinters collecting in your boots. This is a real Viking workout. Forget CrossFit. This is woodfit. Functional strength meets low-level frostbite. Outside, another group is dragging a fallen tree back to the village. You can hear them shouting, probably arguing about the best way to avoid snapping the sled ropes again. You wonder if there's a Viking word for inefficient teamwork. There probably is. And it's probably one syllable and vaguely insulting. Later, you stack the firewood near the hearth in careful rows. Not because you care about neatness, but because you once stacked it wrong, and the whole thing collapsed onto the stew pot mid-boil. You haven't been trusted with seasoning since. While the fire crackles to life, you take a moment to stretch your back. It creaks like an old cartwheel. You stare at the flames, mesmerized. This single flickering source of heat is the difference between comfort and chaos. And it was your job to bring it home. You don't get thanked. No one claps. No saga will mention your firewood haul. But everyone will enjoy warm food tonight. And maybe, if the wind doesn't pick up, you'll sleep without your toes going numb. Not that you'll sleep long. Tomorrow, the woods will be calling again. So will the goats, and the roof, and the smoke hole that keeps letting rain in. But for now, the fire burns, and that's enough. Today is roof day. You can tell because someone's shouting about a leak, and the goats are licking something off the corner post. That usually means the thatch has slipped again. Wonderful. You sigh and prepare yourself for several hours of climbing, balancing, and poking around in dusty bundles of straw while trying not to fall directly into the pig pen. The Viking longhouse roof isn't your average weekend DIY project. It's made of overlapping sod or thick thatch, bundles of straw, reeds, or even heather, layered and wedged with painful precision over curved wooden beams. If you've ever tried to build a roof using garden waste and prayer, you've got the idea. You grab a bundle of replacement thatch, an iron knife, and a ladder that looks more like a glorified stick with ambitions. Climbing it is a full-body trust exercise. It wobbles, you wobble. Everyone watching you also wobbles emotionally. The roof groans under your weight, and your boots crunch softly against the old straw. Bits of it crumble underfoot, releasing a cloud of dry dust and the faint smell of mildew and goat breath. Somewhere below, someone says, "Don't fall." Helpful. You crouch and begin the task of patching the breach. Rainwater has snuck in overnight, dripping down the central beam and making the sleeping corner smell like swamp stew. You yank out the sodden thatch, revealing a neat little tunnel where some rodent has made a luxury condo. It squeaks indignantly and bolts. You apologize out loud, which is a little awkward since you're talking to a mouse. As you wedge in fresh straw, your hands itch. That's the worst part of thatching. Aside from the falling risk, the allergic reactions, and the eternal roof grime under your nails, you tug the bundles tight, slicing them to size with the blade, and shove them into place with the stubbornness of someone who has absolutely no desire to be doing this again next week. Historians still argue whether thatching was a seasonal communal effort or something tackled in miserable piecemeal fashion, like today. Either way, you're alone up here, muttering to yourself and trying not to sneeze into the wind. From your high perch, you can see the whole village. A few longhouses puff smoke from their roof holes. Kids are chasing each other with sticks. Someone's yelling about a missing chicken again. It's peaceful in that organized chaos held together by salted fish and twine kind of way. You pause to catch your breath. Your thighs burn from squatting, and your lower back is filing a formal complaint. You lean back slightly, bad idea, and nearly lose your balance. One arm flails. A clump of straw plummets dramatically to the ground below. Someone cheers. You do not. After resecuring your footing and your pride, you finish the repair. A few new bundles jammed tightly in place, lashed with rawhide strips and carefully angled to shunt off water. It's not pretty, but it'll hold, hopefully through the next 3 rainstorms, 4 wind tantrums, and one particularly clumsy seagull that always seems to land directly on this corner. Climbing down is worse than climbing up. The ladder sways like it wants you to know who's in charge. Your boots slip once, and your heart lurches. But eventually, you're back on solid ground, sore and covered in roof confetti. Inside, someone gives you a nod of approval. It's the Viking equivalent of a standing ovation. You're handed a cup of lukewarm ale, which tastes exactly like you'd expect roof repair ale to taste, like dust and relief. You sit near the hearth, scratching at the straw lodged in your sleeve, and glance up at your handiwork. No drip, no dampness, just dry beams and faint smoke curling upward like a thank you note. You allow yourself one smug breath, then immediately get handed a broom, because apparently there's thatch all over the floor now. You sweep in slow, heavy strokes, the ache settling deep into your spine. But it's a good ache, the kind that says, you did something useful today. No fame, no songs, just a roof that doesn't leak, and a house that won't turn into a mushroom farm by morning. And maybe that's enough. It's laundry day. Again. You'd think with all the salt, smoke, and perpetual grime, Vikings wouldn't care too much about clean clothes. But they absolutely do. You, however, would rather face a berserker than another afternoon scrubbing your linen tunic in glacial runoff with soap made of week-old ash sludge and sheep tallow. The pile of clothes is somehow bigger than last week's. It always is. Tunics, woolen underclothes, sashes, socks, trousers, aprons, all stained with smoke, fish oil, mud, and occasionally goat droppings. Laundry in the Viking Age is more than a chore. It's a test of will. You gather the heap, your arms full of crusty linen and questionable scents, and head toward the washing pit. It's not glamorous, just a shallow depression near the stream, lined with large stones and filled with cold, fast-moving water that makes your fingers go numb within seconds. You kneel on a flat rock, your knees complaining before you even start. A battered wooden tub rests nearby, along with a half-empty sack of lye soap made by boiling wood ash and animal fat until it congeals into a gray paste that somehow cleans and burns your skin at the same time. You grab the first tunic, already stiff from 3 days of wear, and dunk it into the water. It slaps wetly, like a small, defeated creature. You scrub the cloth against the rock, swirl it in the freezing stream, rub it with soap, then scrub it again. It's basically trying to polish a stain off a damp bear. The other women nearby, tired, red-handed, and equally unimpressed with life, mutter about someone leaving their wool cloak in the goat enclosure again. One of them holds up a tunic with a mysterious dark streak across the hem. "Blood?" she asks. "Beets," someone else offers. Or possibly fermented fish juice. You all collectively choose not to investigate. While laundry wasn't considered hard labor in Viking society, it certainly wasn't pleasant either. Historians note that cleanliness was actually a point of pride for Norse people. Combs, tweezers, even ear picks have been found in graves, suggesting a surprising level of grooming. So yes, your fingernails are filled with soap scum and fish scale now. But somewhere, you imagine your ancestors would be proud. Once a piece is clean by Viking standards, no longer smells like regret. It gets wrung out by hand. You twist it, arms shaking until your wrists crack, and a small waterfall rains onto your boots. You slap it flat and lay it over the drying stones, already covered in garments gently steaming in the sun like flat woolen pancakes. The wind picks up. The socks flutter, the tunics billow, and one pair of trousers begins migrating toward the goat pen. You chase it. You always end up chasing something on laundry day. One particularly crusty cloak resists your efforts entirely. The mud won't budge. You beat it against a rock. Nothing. You shout at it. Still nothing. Finally, you soak it in a tub of lye, throw in a prayer to whichever god handles domestic survival, and move on. Some stains aren't meant to be conquered in a single lifetime. There's also the dye work. Your sister brings over a tunic that's faded into that dull, gray-brown color everything eventually becomes. She hands you a bowl of crushed berries. "Try this," she says with the casual optimism of someone who won't be wearing the result. You dunk the tunic in the makeshift dye and stir. Your fingers stain purple immediately. By the time you're done, the tunic is sort of pinkish or possibly mold-colored. Hard to say. Fashion isn't an exact science here. You hang it up anyway. It joins the others in a sagging line of garments, slowly becoming less disgusting under the weak sun. A child runs past, trips over a sock, and falls into the stream. No one reacts. It's laundry day. We've all fallen into the stream, metaphorically or otherwise. There's also the folding, which is less about crisp corners and more about, how do I stuff this in my storage box without it smelling like seaweed again? You pile the now damp clothes into a woven basket, arms aching, fingers raw, and begin the slow walk back to the longhouse. The clothes are clean-ish. You, however, are a disaster. You peel off your own damp sleeves and realize you've soaked through your wool. Again, you'll have to come back out later and wash your own garments. That, or you just wait for the rain and do a celebratory arms-out pirouette next time it pours. Both options are valid. Still, there's a weird satisfaction in seeing a line of freshly cleaned clothes fluttering in the breeze. The smell of soap ash and river moss clinging to them instead of fish guts and goat sweat. You breathe in, cough, and reconsider how fresh that air really is. But it's cleaner than yesterday. That's something. You dump the basket near the hearth, rub your temples, and collapse onto a stool. One of the kids offers you a piece of bread. You nod, take a bite, and chew quietly while eyeing the pile of clothes waiting to be folded. No one's in a rush. You'll get to them. Eventually, after your arms forgive you, or after a nap. Probably the nap. You wake up to the clatter of hooves, not the exciting kind, like a war horse galloping into battle, but the very unheroic kind. Goats trampling your barley patch. Again. You groan, throw on your damp woolen cloak from yesterday's laundry debacle, and shuffle outside. Sure enough, 2 goats and a suspiciously smug-looking sheep are halfway through your vegetable bed. One is chewing a turnip leaf like it's a victory cigar. You wave your arms, hiss at them, and finally resort to throwing a wooden spoon. It misses, barely. They scatter, unconcerned, as if this is part of the game. Livestock maintenance isn't usually featured in Viking sagas, but maybe it should be. Because without goats, cows, pigs, chickens, and the occasional misbehaving duck, your entire village would collapse into hunger and chaos within a week. You tie what's left of your cloak and head to the pen to inspect the rest of the herd. The pen smells, predictably, like fermented barnyard. You step carefully between clumps of things you choose not to identify. Inside, the goats are bleating their demands like woolly little tyrants. You toss them handfuls of dried hay, pour water into the trough, and try to ignore the one goat that keeps climbing the fence like it's auditioning for a circus. Caring for animals is a full-time job. They get sick, they get moody, they escape, and they always seem to find new ways to ruin your morning. But they're also your lifeline. The goats give milk, which gets turned into cheese. The chickens lay eggs. The pigs, well, they don't do much now. But come winter, they'll be a very important part of dinner. You grab a small wooden pail and move to the milking stool. One of the older nannies eyes you, like she remembers the last time you tried this, and spilled everything. You approach slowly, apologetically. You pat her side. She does not care. You settle in, grip the teats gently, and begin to milk. The stream hits the pail with a satisfying rhythm. There's something oddly meditative about it, until the goat shifts suddenly, nearly kicks you, and snorts directly into your face. So much for Zen. Once the pails are full, well, half full after accounting for kicks and sloshes, you carry them inside. They're added to the morning meal plan, some for cheese, some for soup, some probably just to spill again later. You're already calculating how long before someone accidentally drops the pot while stirring. Historians note that Viking households were remarkably self-sufficient. Even small homesteads kept multiple types of livestock, carefully breeding and managing them through harsh winters and unpredictable harvests. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. Animal bones found in excavations show signs of careful butchering and preservation. They also show that goats were by far the sassiest based on absolutely no evidence, just your personal experience. You spend the next hour reinforcing the chicken coop. Again. A fox got in last week. Or maybe it was a raccoon. Or a witch. The locals couldn't agree. Either way, several chickens vanished and left only feathers and dramatic clucks behind. You hammer a few new boards in place, mutter threats to all known predators, and check on the surviving hens. They peck around you disinterestedly. You collect a handful of eggs, careful not to crack them, and tuck them into a pouch. You glance up at the sky, cloudy, gray, threatening rain. Of course. You hurry inside before the heavens open up and ruin your socks. Midday arrives with a plate of boiled grains, a lump of cheese, and half a smoked fish. It's not glamorous, but it's warm. You sit by the hearth, chewing slowly, letting your muscles settle. The livestock are quiet for now, full and lazy. One goat has fallen asleep in the sun with its tongue sticking out. But you know it won't last. Sure enough, just as you take your final bite, someone bursts in shouting, "The cow's stuck again!" You stare at your bowl, set it down, and rise. Time to wrestle a cow out of the stream, again. By the time you reach the pasture, the cow has wandered halfway into a muddy bank and is staring at you like this is your fault. You grab a rope, loop it around her horns, and begin the slow tug of war. She resists. You tug harder. She resists more. A neighbor joins in. Together, you heave, slide, shout, and finally extract a very unhappy, very soggy cow from the mud. You're both covered in slop, and neither of you feel victorious. But she's safe. And tomorrow she'll give milk. Maybe, if she's in the mood. Back home, you wash your hands with cold water and sand, the Viking version of soap, and change into your least dirty tunic. The house smells like stew again. Probably goat. Everything is goat. You sit, you breathe. You take exactly 3 sips of mead before someone says, "We should probably check the fence before nightfall." Of course, because in the Viking world, if you're not chasing goats, building fences, or scraping mud off a cow, you're probably asleep, or dead, or both. You dreamed of nothing last night because your sleep was interrupted 5 times, once by a goat, twice by your little brother kicking you in the ribs, once by a leak dripping directly on your forehead, and once, just for variety, by a rat chewing on your bootlaces. You wake up groggy, spine creaking like a worn-out ox cart, and squint at the pale morning light bleeding through the smoke hole. It's not raining. That's the only win today. Today's agenda: bread. You might not be raiding monasteries or forging epic swords, but someone's got to make sure nobody starves, and that someone is you. Bread in a Viking household isn't a daily luxury. It's a daily necessity, and making it is surprisingly complicated, especially when your oven is a rock dome and your flour smells faintly of mildew. You begin by checking the grain supply. It's stored in woven sacks tucked in the driest corner of the longhouse, although dry is a generous term. You open one up and scoop out a handful, mostly barley, a few rye kernels, one very bold weevil. You sigh and start picking out the extras. It's not the worst thing you've found in the flour, and honestly, you're too tired to care. You lug the grain outside to the grinding stone, a large slab and a heavy round handstone you've grown to hate. Grinding barley by hand is like being stuck in a never-ending arm workout designed by a vengeful blacksmith. You rotate the top stone, slowly crushing the grain into a coarse flour that drifts into your lap and your lungs. Vikings didn't have refined flour. This is chunky, sandy, full of husks, and the occasional pebble if you're not careful. You sneeze, cough, and keep grinding. A neighbor walks past and nods. "Storm coming," he mutters. "Great, better bake fast." Once you've ground enough to feed your household, and maybe the next one over, you haul it into the kitchen space. The air smells like smoke, yeast, and ambition. You add a pinch of salt, some water, and if you're lucky, a scrap of sourdough starter saved from yesterday. No yeast packets here, just old fermented dough passed on like a family secret. Mixing the dough is another workout. You plunge your arms into the bowl, elbow deep, kneading, folding, punching, muttering threats. The dough clings to your fingers like wet burlap. After what feels like hours, it's soft enough to shape. You You tear off small rounds and flatten them into thick, uneven discs. These aren't fluffy loaves. They're dense, slightly sour barley cakes that could double as coasters or projectiles. You poke a hole in the center of each one. It helps them bake evenly and hang better over the fire later. The oven is a stone-lined pit, preheated with burning coals. You rake them aside, toss the bread onto the hot surface, and cover the entrance with a slate slab. You wait. You poke the fire. You wait more. Outside, children chase each other with sticks. Someone is chopping wood in an aggressive, definitely not therapeutic way. The cows moo at something no one else can see. You lean back and exhale. Your back cracks in 4 places. A smell starts to drift from the oven, smoky, earthy, a little burnt. You lift the slab and pull the bread out, 1 disc at a time. They're hot, slightly charred on the edges, and perfect, mostly. You stack them in a cloth-lined basket and carry them proudly inside. Bread was a staple in Norse diets. While fish and meat were important, grain provided the bulk of daily calories. Archaeologists have found bread remains in hearths across Scandinavia, burnt, crumbled, full of seeds, nuts, and sometimes tiny bones. Accidentally, we hope. It wasn't fancy, but it fed empires. You set the bread on the main table. Within seconds, your brother snatches one and burns his fingers. You offer no sympathy. This is a recurring event. The rest of the day blurs into more baking. You try honey bread, which mostly turns into sticky charcoal. You try seed cakes with flax and fennel. Too bitter. You try a flatbread experiment that fuses to the cooking stone so thoroughly it may become an archaeological find for future generations. As the sky darkens, you bake the last round, wrap the warm loaves in linen, and tuck them near the fire. Your arms are jelly. Your hair smells like ash and barley, but your house will eat tonight. You grab a piece for yourself, bite into it, and chew slowly. It's chewy, slightly sour, and faintly gritty. You crunch something that may or may not be a husk. You shrug. At least it's not a bone. You lean back against the wall, watching the flames flicker against the bread basket. It's not treasure. It's not glory. But it's enough. And for a Viking, that's kind of the whole point. You're barely digesting your gritty chunk of barley bread when someone calls from the doorway. Time to repair the fishing net. Of course it is. You sigh the long sigh of someone who knows their fingers are about to spend the next several hours being stabbed by tiny ropes. Because while Vikings are known for ships and swords, their survival, especially inland or near fjords, relied heavily on fish. And fishing, as you've learned, is 10% catching and 90% untangling something that smells like seaweed and disappointment. You trudge out to the communal net rack, a set of wooden beams where lines of netting hang like forgotten laundry. The scent is unmistakable. Salt, dried scales, and rope mildew. Your net is right there, sagging pitifully, full of holes that weren't there yesterday. Probably. You sit cross-legged on a worn stool, needle and twine in hand, and get to work. Viking fishing nets are made from flax or hemp fibers, twisted into strong cords, knotted in a grid that catches everything from herring to trout. You've patched this same net 23 times. It's basically more patch than net now. You thread the twine through the loops, pulling it tight, creating fresh knots where fish have punched their way through. It's not fast work. Your fingers cramp. The wind picks up and throws loose hair in your eyes. A neighbor walks past and mutters, "Big catch yesterday tore mine in half." You nod solemnly and add that to your list of things to worry about. Historians still debate just how widespread net fishing was in Viking communities. Some argue that line fishing was more common inland, while coastal villages relied on large communal nets for bulk hauls. Either way, the evidence is clear. If you didn't fish, you didn't eat. And if you didn't maintain your net, you really didn't eat. As you work, you find some surprises tangled in the old net: a crab claw, a wooden bead, one extremely annoyed frog. You gently extract the invader and send it hopping back toward the stream. Nature, as usual, doesn't care about your plans. Your brother joins you, half helping, half tangling another section by accident. "I'm good at this," he says, while knotting 3 sections together in a way that can only be described as abstract. You smile tiredly and undo his masterpiece. Finally, the last section is patched. You hold the net up to the light. It's not perfect, but it'll do. You coil it into a woven basket and carry it down to the river. It's time to fish. Viking fishing isn't serene. It's freezing, your boots are wet, and something always splashes suspiciously close to your knees. You wade into the shallows and cast the net carefully, letting it drift with the current, then slowly pulling it back toward shore. The tension is familiar. The rope tightening, the sudden weight, the anticipation. You haul it in, hand over hand, muscles straining. There's movement, a flash of silver, success. A small catch today, 2 trout and a wriggling mess of river weeds. You pluck them out, toss the fish into a bucket, and cast again, and again, and again. Your arms ache, your back throbs. You wonder if this is what warrior spirit actually means. Eventually, the sun dips lower. Your fingers are numb. You've caught 7 fish, 1 eel, and what might be a very confused shoe. You pack up and head home, bucket sloshing. Dinner that night is fresh fish, pan-fried over the hearth with salt and herbs. You eat slowly, savoring the result of your labor. It's not a feast, but it's warm, and it tastes like victory. Your hands are rope-burned. Your tunic smells like river. But you patched the net, fed your family, and avoided stepping on another crab. Tomorrow, you'll probably have to do it again. But for now, the fire crackles. The wind is quiet, and the net, patched and coiled by the door, is ready for whatever comes next. You're woken by the sound of arguing outside the longhouse. 2 neighbors are locked in heated debate over whose ox cart broke the communal grain grinder. Again, you pull your cloak over your head and pretend it's not your problem. But today, it is your problem, because it's your turn on the grain duty rotation. That means sorting, drying, storing, and praying that mice, mold, and neighbor sabotage don't ruin an entire season's worth of food. You rise with the enthusiasm of a wet towel, tie your hair back, and prepare for another thrilling day of inventory. First stop, the grain storage hut, a thatched lean-to that somehow manages to trap heat, cold, and dampness all at once. The sacks inside are stacked awkwardly, bulging at the seams with barley, rye, and a small but essential stash of flaxseed. You pull back the flap and are greeted by 2 things: a gust of stale air and a mouse darting out of a chewed bag like it owns the place. You sigh, grab a broom, and begin damage control. You kneel and begin scooping up the spilled grain, handful by handful, and as you do, the reality of the task hits you. This is the Norse equivalent of balancing your national budget while rats throw parties in the vault. You can't afford to lose this food. Each kernel is calories, winter security, and hard-won labor. You pick out pebbles, broken seeds, and the occasional uninvited beetle. It's not glamorous, but it's crucial. Grain was the backbone of the Viking diet. Most of it came from hardy barley and rye, grown in short summers and harvested with tools that dulled after 3 good swings. Bread, porridge, beer, It all starts here, in this dusty hut on your dusty hands. Historians have found carbonized remains of Viking bread in hearths, still studded with husks. Some even believe that due to grit from stone grinding, Norse diets slowly wore down their teeth. So yes, this stuff is nutritious, but it fights back. Once the salvageable grain is swept and sorted, you open new sacks to begin the drying process. The old way is simple but painstaking. Spread the grain in thin layers across wide, shallow trays, then set them near the hearth to absorb gentle, even heat. Too much and you'll scorch them. Too little and they'll mold faster than leftover stew. As you spread them, your back begins to protest. The trays are heavy. The grain shifts like stubborn sand, and the fire flickers just close enough to make you sweat without actually warming your cold feet. You rotate trays in and out throughout the morning, watching for signs of damp clumps. Occasionally, you poke a wooden paddle through them, just to keep things aerated. The smell is earthy, toasty, and vaguely comforting, until a puff of ash floats into your eye. You curse softly and blink the grain out. Your little cousin runs in and offers to help. This means she dumps a tray sideways and immediately flees. You start again, silently negotiating the limits of familial love. Later, the dried grain must be ground into flour. You and your cousin head outside where the cornstone waits. A flat, circular stone base and a matching top you spin by hand. It's a medieval gym machine with no satisfaction. You pour in small handfuls of grain, turn the stone, and collect the gritty, uneven flour in a shallow wooden bowl. It's slow, very slow. The stone squeaks with each turn, and the flour dust sticks to your sweat. Your cousin quits halfway through. You keep going because dinner depends on it, and so does trade. Flour isn't just for bread. It's barter. It's social capital. It's part of wedding dowries and midwinter feasts. By noon, your arms are shaking, your stomach's rumbling, and your hair is full of flour. You store what you've ground in sealed clay jars. These go into a straw-lined pit in the coolest corner of the longhouse, the Viking version of a walk-in pantry. But you're not done yet. Next up, seed sorting. Because if you plant the wrong grain next season, grain that's cracked, soft, or infested, you don't just lose a crop. You risk famine. You spread out your seed stock and begin picking. Full, plump grains go into one bowl. Shriveled, discolored, or bug-bitten ones go into the discard pile. Occasionally, a mouse turd tries to sneak into the mix. You pluck it out without flinching. It's not your first grain rodeo. While you work, a neighbor strolls by and talks your ear off about his new barley blend. You nod politely, though you're 90% sure he's just renamed regular rye. Vikings weren't above marketing. As you finish sorting, a new problem arrives. A light drizzle starts to fall, threatening the sacks still stacked outside. You scramble, hauling them indoors, your boots slipping in the mud. One splits open mid-sprint, dumping your perfectly dried grain onto the wet ground. You stand there in the rain, staring at the mess with quiet rage. Eventually, you scoop it up, pour it into a fresh sack, and stick it near the fire to re-dry. This batch is going to taste like frustration. Back inside, your grandmother is already mixing some of the morning flour with honey and dried berries for a feast day loaf. She gives your hands a glance and nods. That's Viking approval. You feel oddly proud. Dinner is heavy barley porridge, dark bread, and stewed greens. You eat slowly, jaw tired from chewing the grain that you personally harvested, cleaned, dried, and ground. It tastes better that way, partly because it's earned, and partly because you're too exhausted to critique it. Later, as you curl up on your bedding near the wall, You listen to the gentle rustle of stored sacks settling. The grains inside will feed your family, your village, maybe even someone 3 fjords away. It's not a saga-worthy triumph, but it's the quiet kind of victory that lets sagas happen at all. You're dreaming about quiet fields and talking goats when someone kicks your foot. It's your uncle, holding a pitchfork and looking much too enthusiastic for sunrise. "Heyday," he says, 2 words that immediately crush your soul. You sit up slowly, every muscle sore from yesterday's flower frenzy. Outside, the morning fog clings low to the ground like a sullen ghost. You pull on your boots, still damp, always damp, and shuffle out to meet the day. Haymaking is essential to surviving the Viking winter. Without a solid stash of dried grass and meadow herbs, your animals won't make it to spring. And if they go, so do milk, cheese, meat, manure, and the general will to live. So, yes, this chore is boring, but it's the lifeline that wraps itself around your ankles like brambles for half the year. You grab a rake, a scythe, and a bundle of ambition held together by guilt. Out in the meadow, the grass is tall, waving gently in the breeze like it doesn't know you're about to cut it down. You sigh and get started. The scythe slices through the grass in wide, even arcs. It's oddly satisfying for about 5 minutes. Then your arms start to burn, your shoulder clicks ominously, and you remember that this will take all day. Your uncle moves next to you, swinging his blade like a man possessed. You try to match his pace. You do not succeed. Haymaking in Viking times wasn't just about cutting grass. It was strategy. You had to watch the weather, time your cut, dry the hay quickly, and stack it securely, all without losing your mind or your fingers. If it rained too soon, the hay molded. If it dried too long, it lost nutrients. You lived and died by cloud patterns. You fall into rhythm. Swing, step, breathe, curse. The sun climbs higher, and soon your tunic is soaked with sweat. Grass clings to your arms. Your boots are filled with itchy seeds. Somewhere behind you, your cousin sneezes 6 times in a row. "Hay fever," she says, eyes watering. You nod in solemn understanding. The meadow is beautiful, yes, but it wants you dead. By midday, you break for lunch. Bread, goat cheese, and a handful of dried apples. You eat sitting in the grass, legs aching, surrounded by neat rows of hay slowly turning gold in the sun. It almost looks like a painting, if paintings came with bees and lower back pain. After eating, it's time to flip the hay. Each row has to be turned with a wide wooden rake so the underside can dry evenly. You rake gently, trying not to clump it or fling it onto your cousin. Again. This step takes hours, and the sun is not gentle. It bakes your neck, your arms, even the back of your knees. Still, there's something oddly peaceful about it. Just the whisper of grass, the buzz of insects, the faint snoring of your uncle when he takes a supervisory nap under a tree. Vikings didn't have tractors or balers. They built hay racks, tall wooden frames for drying bundles, and sometimes stored hay in covered mounds near barns. You help carry bundles to the racks, stack them carefully, and pray that the clouds on the horizon stay polite. Later, a gust of wind knocks over part of the drying rack. You chase down 2 flying hay bundles like you're catching sacred scrolls. A goat tries to eat one. You yell. It blinks. You lose. By evening, the work slows. The meadow is cut. The racks are full. The sun sets over a sea of golden stubble, and your shirt smells like cut grass and desperation. You trudge home, carrying the last rake over your shoulder, like a Viking who conquered hay instead of kingdoms. Dinner is smoked trout, mashed turnips, and fermented cabbage. You eat in exhausted silence, fingers stained green, hair full of mystery leaves. Your grandmother pats your back and calls you, "Hey, warrior." It's not heroic, but it's strangely satisfying. Before bed, you wander out to the drying field once more. The moonlight makes the hay shimmer like threads of gold. It's quiet now. The wind has stilled. For a brief moment, you feel like part of something ancient and necessary, like your effort has woven you into the fabric of survival itself. Back inside, you collapse onto your bedding. Every joint protests. You smell like a barn, but your heart feels full in a way raiding never could. Because sometimes the greatest glory comes from grass. You wake to the sound of frost cracking across the roof timbers. It's still dark outside, but your breath hangs in the air like smoke. Your blanket, made of thick wool and patched over and over, barely holds in the heat. Winter hasn't fully arrived yet, but it's knocking at the door. And today is all about getting ready for it. You roll out of bed, pull on 3 layers of tunics, itchy, scratchy, and scratchier, and step outside. The ground is hard, your boots crunch the frost, and the wind slides under your clothes like a rude spirit. You can see your neighbor's breath as he lugs firewood across the yard. He waves, and you both mutter the same word like a prayer. Winter. Every year it comes, and every year you prepare. But it never gets easier. You always feel like you're racing a bear that just woke up hungry and angry. First, it's food storage. You make your way to the root cellar. It's a deep pit dug into the ground, lined with stone, roofed with turf, and filled with everything that might last. Onions, turnips, smoked meat, dried herbs, dried fish, salted butter, and even a few apples that haven't gone bad yet. You go in with a list in your head and come out with worry. A sack of oats looks damp. 1 jar of pickled cabbage smells wrong. 2 rats bolt from under a shelf like guilty thieves. You fix what you can. Move the oats, throw out the bad jar, curse the rats, and make a mental note. You'll need more traps. Vikings didn't have fridges or canned food. Winter survival meant clever storage and constant checking. Families used pits, barrels, sacks, and hanging racks. Every village had its own tricks, wrapping cheese in birch bark, packing meat in ash, layering dried herbs with salt. But even the best methods failed if someone forgot to check the lids. Next, it's time for wool prep. You bring out the sacks of raw wool sheared from your own sheep. It's greasy, full of dirt, and smells like wet barn. You sit with your grandmother by the fire and start the slow job of cleaning and carding, pulling the fibers apart with brushes until they're smooth and fluffy. Then comes spinning. You twirl the spindle between your fingers, twisting the wool into long, even threads. It takes hours to make enough yarn for even 1 scarf. Your fingers go numb. Your back aches. But every thread means warmth later. While you work, your grandmother tells you about a winter when the river froze solid for 4 weeks, and they had to melt snow just to boil porridge. You've heard this story 10 times, but you let her tell it again. It keeps her warm and reminds you what you're up against. Historians still argue whether every household spun its own yarn, or if some relied on trade with larger farms. But one thing's clear. Wool wasn't just clothing. It was insulation. It was status. It was survival. By mid-morning, you head out to chop firewood. The stack by the longhouse looks impressive until you remember it has to last 5 months. You grab your axe, test the blade, and get to work. The logs split with a satisfying crack, sending chips flying. You stack each piece carefully, crisscrossed so the air can flow. Wet wood is useless. It steams and hisses and refuses to burn. Dry wood, though, that's gold. That's warmth. That's soup and stories and staying alive. Your cousin joins you with her own axe, smaller, but no less sharp. She sets a log on the stump, takes a swing, and misses by a mile. You both laugh, and she glares at the log like it insulted her ancestors. As the pile grows, you start to feel the weight of the season pressing in. The sun is low. The days are shrinking. There's a heaviness in the air that even laughter can't push out. You take a break and walk to the edge of the woods, eyes scanning for dead branches and fallen limbs you can drag back. You find a few good ones, and a fox watching you with quiet curiosity. You nod. The fox blinks. You both return to your own survival plans. Back home, it's time to patch the walls. The wind finds every crack between the logs and sends icy fingers into the house. You mix moss and mud into thick, sticky paste and press it into the gaps. It's slow work, and your gloves get stiff, but when the wind dies down, you can already feel the difference. Even the animals are being prepped. The chicken's coop is reinforced. The goats are herded into a smaller pen, closer to the longhouse for warmth. You tie up bundles of dry hay and cover them with tarps. Every step is about guarding against the cold that hasn't come yet, but will. Inside, your aunt lights extra oil lamps and lays out more blankets. She's already boiling water for wool dye, planning new mittens and socks. The smell of onion stew floats through the air, rich and warm. It makes your stomach rumble and your heart settle. That night, you eat with the fire blazing high. Everyone's cheeks are pink from the cold. Your hands are raw, your legs tired, your shoulders sore, but the house is warmer, the pantry fuller, and the wind feels just a little less sharp. You sit on the bench, sipping warm mead, staring into the fire. Sparks drift upward like tiny stars. You're not ready. You're never truly ready, but you're close. And that counts. You wake to shouting again, but this time, it's not over chores or broken tools. It's coming from the middle of the village, where two men are nose to nose, red-faced, and yelling about a pig. Apparently, someone's prized sow wandered into someone else's barley patch, and now it's become a full-blown neighborhood crisis. You sigh, pull on your boots, and shuffle out the door. Not because it's your business, but because, in Viking society, everyone's business becomes everyone's business. See, Vikings didn't just fight battles with swords. They fought them with lawsuits, oaths, witnesses, and long public arguments, often with more shouting than swinging. You might think they settled every disagreement with an axe, but more often, they settled them at the thing, the local assembly, where problems were argued, verdicts were given, and reputations were made or broken. You arrive at the village square just in time to hear someone accuse the pig of willful property damage. Another person argues that the fence wasn't up to standard. A third chimes in, pointing out that the pig's owner once borrowed a goose without asking. Suddenly, we've gone from barley to goose theft in under 2 minutes. Welcome to Viking courtroom drama. The thing was where justice lived. Every village, region, and district had one. Men, and occasionally women, could bring their grievances, defend their innocence, or seek compensation. There were no lawyers. You made your own case, backed by witnesses, oaths, and a very solid memory. You sit on a rock, chewing a piece of dried apple, and watch as the argument escalates. A woman stands up and reminds everyone that last summer's fence collapse was caused by the same pig. Gasps, accusations. A man trips over a bucket. But even in all this chaos, the system has structure. Disputes were often settled with wergild, a payment system. Damage someone's field, pay in silver or livestock. Hurt someone's son, same thing. Kill someone's cousin? Bigger price? Kill someone important? Even more. There were charts for this stuff. Literally, lists showing exactly how much each injury, insult, or death was worth. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about balance. Keep the peace. Avoid blood feuds. Let people live near each other without turning the longhouse into a war zone. Of course, this didn't always work. You remember one case from last year. 2 families argued over who owned a patch of grazing land. It started politely. Then someone insulted someone's aunt. Then there were curses. Then someone's goat disappeared under suspicious circumstances. It ended with both sides refusing to attend each other's weddings for a year, and one guy being forced to give up his best cloak as compensation. Dramatic? Yes. Bloody? Number. That was the point. You watch now as today's pig feud is finally brought to a vote. The accused nods solemnly. He'll build a new fence and give the barley owner a basket of dried fish. The pig is officially declared not at fault. The village claps. Justice is served. The pig snorts. Even gossip had power in Viking society. News traveled fast, and if enough people believed something, it might as well be true. That's why oaths mattered. If you swore something publicly and were later caught lying, your word lost value, and that could ruin you. In fact, some people became known for their honesty. Their word could settle disputes on the spot. Others were so slippery they couldn't get their neighbors to lend them a hammer. You think about your cousin, who once lied about who broke the milk pot. To this day, no one lets him touch pottery. And not every dispute was small. Occasionally, the thing handled serious crimes, theft, assault, even murder. Those trials could go on for days. People brought in witnesses, recited complicated family trees, and even submitted runestones with carved testimony. The stakes were high. A guilty verdict could mean exile, or worse. But most village drama was about everyday life. Stolen tools, lazy sons-in-law, chickens that wandered too far, accusations of cheating at board games. It sounds silly until you realize these arguments were how the community protected itself. It kept things from boiling over. Better to argue for an hour than fight for a generation. After the pig case, the assembly breaks into small groups. Someone passes around mead. People are laughing again. Someone plays a bone flute. The sun is warm, and the pig is lying in the shade like it just won a lawsuit. You help your aunt pack up her stall. She brought wool for trade and made 2 deals during the debate. One for dyed yarn, and one for smoked salmon. She says arguing makes people hungry. As the crowd thins out, your friend tells you about another case from a nearby village. A man accused his neighbor of stealing his soapstone cooking pot. The thing heard both sides. Turned out, the pot wasn't stolen. It was borrowed, then forgotten, then used to store goose feathers. The accused apologized by gifting a fresh fish. Everyone went home happy. You smile. It's almost poetic. Even Viking warriors, tough as they were, spent much of their time wrapped up in these disputes. Not every day was a raid. Most days were about who stepped on whose field or who built their outhouse too close to someone else's wall. You head home just as the sun begins to dip. The pig is still lying there, proud and victorious. Your cousin walks past, shakes his head, and mutters, "Should have been exile." You laugh. Inside, your family is preparing dinner. Someone mentions the outcome of the trial. Your grandmother nods, clearly pleased with the verdict. Your uncle grunts something about barley being too fragile anyway. As you sit down to eat, you realize that today wasn't just about laws and oaths. It was about living close together, sharing space, and trying not to let small problems turn into big ones. Because in Viking life, Not all battles were fought with swords. Sometimes they were fought with stubborn words, long memories, and a very mischievous pig. The days are getting shorter now. The wind feels sharper in the mornings, and the animals are quieter, as if they know something you don't. You step outside, your breath curling in the cold air, and see frost on the edges of the longhouse roof. Today is about the spiritual side of Viking life. Not a raid, not a chore, not even an argument about livestock. Instead, it's a day for offerings, whispers to the gods, and the kind of old magic that sits quietly in the corners of your world, watching, waiting, listening. You start the day by joining your grandmother at the family altar. It's a simple setup: some carved wood, a few small animal bones, a bowl of herbs, and a small statue of Freya, goddess of love, fertility, and a few things best not discussed before breakfast. She lights a bit of dried sage and murmurs a short prayer, asking for health and a quiet winter. You copy her movements, a little clumsy but respectful. It's not that you're overly religious, but in this world, you don't ignore the gods. You nod to them, leave offerings, and hope they nod back. Viking religion wasn't about rules. It was about rhythm, seasons, weather, harvests, births, deaths, everything tied into a loop of ceremonies and quiet rituals. Your cousin says a small charm over her wool before spinning. Your aunt never starts cooking without tapping the side of the pot 3 times. No one explains why. They just do it. Historians still debate just how organized Viking religion really was. Some think there were high priests and set ceremonies. Others believe it was more local, more flexible. Family-based customs passed down like secret recipes. The truth is probably somewhere in between. After the morning ritual, you walk down the path toward the sacred grove. It's just past the stream, surrounded by birch trees that shimmer in the cold light. It's not a big place, just a circle of stones, some worn carvings, and an old tree that leans like it knows more than you do. You're bringing a small offering today, a bit of bread, a carved bead, and a feather you found that reminded you of something you can't quite explain. You place them gently at the foot of the stone, whisper a few words, and step back. You don't know if the gods hear you, but you feel heard. Later in the day, a wandering seeress visits your village. She wears layers of dark wool, beads in her hair, and carries a staff tipped with carved bone. Everyone gathers to listen. She speaks slowly, eyes half closed, describing visions of snow, stars, and a long winter full of sharp lessons. People nod. No one asks too many questions. These women, Valur, were respected, feared even. Some believed they could speak with the dead, call storms, or curse enemies. You're not sure what's true, but when she looks at you for a second too long, you shiver. You help your grandmother prepare a small meal for the seeress: stew, goat cheese, and warm mead. It's a quiet way to thank her for the warning, even if it's one you didn't want. Vikings believed in more than just gods. There were spirits in the forests, land wights in the hills, and things that moved in the night. Children were told to greet rocks they passed. Hunters left food in the woods after a good catch. Even the sea had moods that needed calming with whispered words or small gifts tossed into the waves. Once, your cousin laughed during a full moon ritual. The next day, his boots vanished and he got caught in the rain twice. Coincidence? Maybe. But no one's laughed during a ritual since. Even weddings, births, and naming ceremonies had their own spiritual rules. When your younger brother was born, a tiny hammer of Thor was placed in his hand before his name was spoken aloud. The village elder said it would protect him from illness and trolls. He's been healthy ever since, and the only troll you've seen was your neighbor's husband when he skipped washing day. As evening falls, you gather with your family around the hearth. The fire crackles, casting shadows on the walls. Your grandmother tells a story about Odin trading his eye for wisdom. Your little brother asks why he didn't trade a finger instead. Your uncle laughs and says, "Because you can still see with one eye, but try eating stew without a spoon hand." The fire pops. You smile. Stories were more than entertainment. They were memory, tradition, and belief all tied together. They reminded you of who you were, where you came from, and what rules kept the world from falling apart. Before bed, you light a small oil lamp and set it by the door, just in case a wandering spirit needs light. It's a habit, passed down from your mother and hers before her. You don't question it. You lie down, the wool blanket pulled up to your chin. Outside, the stars are sharp and clear. Somewhere in the woods, an owl calls. You think about gods, spirits, ancestors, and the quiet ways they walk through your life. You don't always feel them, but you always make room. You're out mending a fence when you hear it, the low horn call from the edge of the village. 3 long notes, each one rising. Your heart skips. It's not an emergency. It's not a warning. It's a departure call. Someone's going raiding. You lean your head back and sigh. Here we go again. Vikings have a reputation for being fierce raiders, storming across seas to plunder monasteries and villages. That part is true, sometimes. But the truth is, most days looked like yours. Hauling hay, fixing roofs, and scraping mud out of your only good shoes. Raiding was rare, dangerous, and only a small part of Viking life. Still, it makes people act strange. Half the village rushes to the shore. You follow behind, wiping mud from your hands. Down at the docks, a longship is being prepped, sleek, carved with dragons, and smelling like tar and seawater. There's a flurry of movement, shields stacked, dried meat packed, axes checked, ropes coiled. Your older cousin is going. He's already boasting about the silver he'll bring back. You watch him swagger up the plank and try not to roll your eyes. This is his second raid. The first one brought back one small brooch and a sprained ankle. He still tells the story like he conquered a kingdom. Raids happened during late spring to early autumn. They needed calm seas and long daylight hours. The targets were often monasteries or trade settlements, places with wealth and little defense. Sometimes it was retaliation, sometimes opportunity. And yes, sometimes it was just a way to escape farm chores. You help load a barrel onto the ship. It's full of smoked fish. Your cousin says it's for trade. You know it's because no one wants to raid on an empty stomach. As the warriors shout goodbyes and slap backs, the rest of you just watch. You'll stay, like most people do, watching other people go off chasing silver while you worry about things like, who's going to help chop firewood now? Will that goat get loose again? And seriously, who took your knife? Historians often point out that only a minority of Viking men ever went raiding. Most people stayed home, farming, crafting, repairing boats, raising children, tending animals. Raiding was expensive, time-consuming, and risky. A bad voyage meant lost ships, lost men, and no harvest back home. Still, the image persists. You hear tales around the fire, swords flashing in the sun, gold spilling from chests, villagers fleeing in fear. You nod along, but you're thinking about how long it takes to repair a thatched roof after a rainstorm. Not that you're against adventure, but you've seen what real raids look like. Muddy, loud, and full of seasickness. Your cousin threw up 6 times on his first trip. They tell you that part in a whisper. The truth is, raiding was as much logistics as violence. You had to plan routes, store supplies, arrange for trade, and know how to navigate by stars and shoreline. Ships had to be perfectly maintained, sails patched, and rigging tight. And even then, you might get nothing but a broken oar and a cold welcome. You walk past a group of women mending sails. One of them jokes that men go raiding just to get out of cleaning. They all laugh. You smile, but don't argue. That evening, the longship sets out. People cheer. The water glows orange with the setting sun. It looks beautiful, even magical. But you notice something else. People glancing at the empty spots on the benches, calculating how much extra work they'll need to do while half the village is gone. You walk back home, past quiet fields. The geese honk at you like always. A cow gives you a judgmental stare. Nothing has changed. You've still got your chores. Your grandmother is boiling soup. She raises an eyebrow and says, "Well, still want to be a great Viking warrior?" You shrug. Maybe after the harvest. That night, you sharpen tools by the fire. Your cousin's younger brother sits beside you. He's too young to raid, but he's pretending to polish a helmet like it's made of gold. You tell him real helmets smell like sweat and dried stew. He laughs and asks, "What do you think they'll bring back?" You think for a second. Hopefully themselves. Because that's the part the stories skip. Not everyone returns. Some ships vanish. Some men never set foot back on their homeland. Families wait for weeks, months, sometimes forever. And when they come back, they're not always full of stories. They're quiet, tired, changed. But people still go, because the idea of adventure is stronger than the weight of everyday life. Still, you know better. You know the ones who stay behind, who tend the land, mend the sails, comfort the children, repair the broken, are the ones who keep the world running. And while raids might win glory, goats still need milking. It's quiet now. The longhouse is dim, the fire crackling low, and you're finally off your feet. You stretch your arms, crack your knuckles, and let yourself sink into the bench like it might swallow you whole. The wind is howling outside, rattling the shutters. But you're warm, and for now, that's enough. And as you sit in the soft flicker of the firelight, something occurs to you. No one ever sings songs about this. Not about sore backs or broken fence posts. Not about hauling water from the river in freezing rain. Not about the way wool clings to your fingers, or how smoke from the hearth clogs your throat when the wind shifts and the chimney doesn't quite catch. No, they sing about the heroes, the raiders, the kings, the one-eyed gods and dragon-slaying legends, the ones who fought giants or crossed oceans with nothing but a prayer and a sword. Those stories are louder, cleaner, easier to remember. But you've lived enough days now to know that those stories are missing something important. They miss the part where a child won't stop crying until you bounce them just right on your knee. The part where you sit for hours untying a knotted net because someone dropped it in a hurry. The part where you share the last piece of bread even though you're starving and pretend you weren't hungry anyway. They don't tell you about the man who weaves rope so precisely his hands are calloused into the shape of knots, or the woman who knows exactly how to pack dried meat so it stays good through winter, or the way you can sense snow coming before the sky even turns gray. Historians still argue whether the Vikings were more raiders or traders, more brutal than brilliant, more wild than wise. But most agree that the bulk of Viking life wasn't about glory. It was about routine, repetition, and resilience. You remember an old man who once said, The bravest thing I ever did was make it through 62 winters. He was missing 2 fingers and half a smile, but no one laughed. Because everyone knew, surviving ordinary days was its own kind of legend. You look down at your hands. They're dry and cracked, bits of dirt under the nails, a scratch healing on your knuckle. You can still feel the chill in your joints from carrying that bucket of water this morning. You're not old yet, but you're not new either. You've been through enough seasons to know what's coming and what needs doing before it does. Your younger brother is trying to darn a sock by firelight. The stitches are crooked and uneven, but he's concentrating hard, tongue sticking out the side of his mouth. You remember when that was you, fighting with wool, poking yourself with the needle, determined to fix something the right way. You don't correct him. He's learning. And honestly, the sock will hold. Probably. The stew from earlier is still warm in the pot. You reach over and ladle a little into a bowl. It's simple, just roots, a bit of dried meat, and the last of the good barley. But it tastes better now than it did at dinner. Maybe because the house is so quiet. Maybe because you're finally sitting still. Maybe because the fire makes everything taste like home. Across the room, your grandmother is asleep in her chair. Her head leans to one side, her knitting resting in her lap. The cat has claimed her feet as its pillow, snoring gently with tiny squeaks. The old clay oil lamp flickers just enough to make shadows dance across the walls. They stretch and shift like spirits listening in. But you're not afraid. You've lived long enough to know the shadows are just part of the house. Tomorrow there will be more chores. You already know which ones. The thatch needs checking again, and the smokehouse needs sweeping. The goats will probably try escaping, again. And someone needs to go down to the stream for fresh water, because the last jug froze partway and cracked. But for now, there's nothing to do but sit, and breathe, and listen. If you listen closely, you can hear the rhythm of Viking life, not in drums or chants, but in the creak of wood, the hiss of fire, and the soft breathing of a home that's still standing. You think about your cousin who left on the last raid. He swore he'd come back with gold and a French cheese wheel. You got a chipped comb and a seashell instead. He stayed quiet for days after returning. Wouldn't say what happened. Just started helping around the longhouse more often. You never asked. Because maybe the bravest thing anyone can do isn't leaving. It's staying. Staying when it's hard. Staying when it's dull. Staying when no one's watching and the pigs are loose again, and your hands are shaking from cold, but there's still more wood to split. And you realize something else. There is power in being ordinary. Not everyone has to be the hero of a saga. Someone needs to feed the fire. Someone needs to sew the sleeves. Someone needs to keep the world together, while others go looking to tear it apart. You finish the stew and set the bowl aside. The fire has burned low, embers glowing red and sleepy. You move slowly, quietly, tucking the blanket around your grandmother, then checking that the door is latched. You blow out the lamp, climb into bed, and feel the weight of the day settle behind your eyes. And maybe, just maybe, someone will remember this. Not the sword, not the gold, but the soft sound of hands folding clean wool. The strength it takes to wake up and do it all again. The kind of courage no saga ever mentions, because it never needed to. You were there, and you kept going,